one of the most common questions I get asked is, how do I discover my life purpose? How do I figure out what it is I'm meant to do with my life? How many people wonder about that? Raise your hand so I can see. So, almost everybody. Yeah. So I thought in the beginning of my talk I'd just get the answer to that right out of the way so that you can write it down if you want, and then you won't have to ask it anymore. What do you think? Sound good? Yeah. So, interestingly enough, our life purposes are all the same. The reason we're here is to remember who we really are, to remember the incredible spirits that we are. You know, Wayne always says we're spiritual beings in a human body, having a human experience, right? So we're here to remember who we really are, and the main purpose of our lives, from my perspective, both personally and then also professionally, is to grow and evolve as spiritual beings, to get more and more in touch with the true essence of who we are, and to bring that to the world. Does that make sense? Now, it's interesting to me. I've been teaching that for a long time. What's interesting to me is people keep forgetting, and they keep going back to, oh, my purpose is to get the right job, to land the right client, to make the perfect art or beautiful art. My purpose is to be a mom or a dad. My purpose is to raise great children, or my purpose is to help heal the planet. The truth is, first and foremost, your purpose is to wake up. Because interestingly enough, if we keep giving without being connected to our true essence, then we're actually not giving from the most loving and healthy place. Many of us have relationships in our lives, for example, that are actually arrangements. They're not really relationships. You know, my true essence may not be in relationship with your true essence, because so many of us, especially in America, have been lulled into a comfortably numb place. Now, I first started to wake up when I was very young. You know, for a lot of us, our spiritual awakening begins, or the invitation to a spiritual awakening begins early in our life with our romantic relationships. Anybody ever have, like, you know, your heart broken, or a relationship where you just couldn't seem to move on from that relationship, even though everything inside of you, your true essence, was saying, I don't think so, but you stayed there anyway? Some of you may be in those relationships right now, right? But for me, it began when I was like 19 or 20. I got my heart broken by this guy. And I was really upset about it. I was working in a family business at the same time. And fortunately, I say that now, fortunately, he broke my heart and sent me to therapy. What a gift. I didn't know it at the time, of course. But now, bear in mind, I'm 53, so 19 is a long time ago, and if you think therapy is still unconventional now, it was really unconventional back then. But I was desperate. So I was working for a family business, I was working for my dad, and I'm very fond of saying that my dad made Archie Bunker look like a feminist. So you kind of get the idea of who Dad was, right? He knows I love him, and he laughs when he hears me say that. And if he were here, he'd tell you it's true. It was true. So I was working for my dad. I was very successful at a young age. I didn't go to college. Instead, I was working in the family business as a tax consultant. I had a godforsaken passion for the IRS tax code. I have no idea why. But I'm over it now, so please don't ask me. Please don't ask me tax questions in the book signing line. So I went into therapy. I got a referral from somebody because I was really heartbroken. This man who I thought was, you know, the love of my life at 19. Isn't it funny how you think you've met the love of your life at 19? So this man I thought was the love of my life broke my heart. He left me for another older woman. And so I went into therapy. I hired this therapist. Now again, remember, we're talking like, 30 years ago. I went to see this therapist. Her name was Jean, and she was this very big lesbian woman. Which, you could laugh, it's okay. Which again, like she was just this, I say that because I was this good, even back then, a lot of lesbians were in the closet at the time. And it was, when I went to see her, she was the complete opposite of where I had come from and exactly what I needed. And this woman, in a very short period of time, helped me to see that even though I thought my heart was broken by this young man, it was really a call, this ending of this relationship was a call to pay closer attention to what my soul was trying to say to me at 19. And that was that I wasn't happy. That I was doing work like a lot of us in this country do. I was doing work I was really skilled at. I was excellent with math, but I wasn't doing what I loved. And I had no idea what it was that I loved at that point. I stayed in therapy with this woman for 3 years, and she really helped me to not only get over the breakup, but to eventually plan my exit from the family business, which for those of you who have ever been in a family business where you really want mom and dad to love you and to appreciate you, it's really hard to leave a family business. It's a significant relationship to extricate yourself from. So she really helped me to plan my exit. Now, I bring up that story because my decision to seek help outside of me is what set off this spiritual adventure called my life. It was my decision to wake up, to stop pretending that everything was okay. Now, here's the interesting thing that happens when we do that. When we decide that we're finally going to face the truth about what isn't working for us in our lives, it's like there's this divine energy that rallies behind us to support us. And what happens is the most helpful people will start showing up in your life, opportunities will start showing up, doors will open, and yes, doors will also close. Or they'll try to close, and you'll probably fight to keep them open, but some energy on the other side's just going to find a way to close it anyway when you're ready. That's the good news, because what I've seen time and again with clients I've worked with over the years is when they really start telling the truth about their lives, miracles start happening. Now, why is that? Miracles is a tricky word because it makes it sound random and unplanned for, but the truth is, how we live our lives, life is all about energy. The energy we put out into the universe and the energy we take in. And truth has a very distinct energy about it. And when we begin to tell the truth about who we are and what's working and what isn't working in our lives, it's like we open up this energy field and we start to draw to us. Remember, your true essence is the same thing that the divine is made of. We're all swimming in the same pool, the same ocean. Ocean's so much better than pool. So we're all connected in that way. So what does that mean in life? For me, that experience of getting into therapy, which by the way would be the first of many visits to great therapists who would help me along my journey to stay awake. Because left to my own devices, I would be sleepwalking right here. I wouldn't even be here today. I would probably be married to somebody that I wasn't really happy with children, feeling completely overwhelmed, and just feeling like, wishing and hoping for a better life at some point before I die. That's probably where I would have been. But that decision to step outside of myself, to recognize, even at 19, that it was my thinking that got me into that situation, and my energy that got me into that situation, and that things weren't going to change unless I opened myself up to new energy. So what does it mean to finally face the truth about how we're living, about what's working and what isn't working? So, for example, I like to make things really practical. I'm a practical kind of gal. If you're sitting in this room and you're in a relationship, for example, that isn't working for you. Relationships are the hardest things we deal with, I think, when it comes to our growth, because they're so scary to have to face the truth about. But if you're sitting in this room and you're in a relationship that isn't working for you, and you're not doing anything about it, you're blocking the energy that could support both you and the other person, by the way. Now, this might not just be a significant other, it could be a work environment. There may be a coworker or a boss that you're working with closely, and that relationship, there's something that just isn't working for you, and you either need to make a decision to tell the truth and heal it, or move on in order to open up that energy. Now, when you do, amazing things happen. When you decide, I remember one time I was working with this woman. I wrote about her in Take Time for Your Life. She was a consultant, and she had come to me because she had no time for her life, which was, where that book was born from. Actually, that book was born from the fact that I had no time for my life. Everything I write about is usually just based on my own experiences and how I overcome them. Melanie was working with this one client in particular, and when we started working together, she said to me, this client's making me crazy. He thinks I'm on beck and call 24/7. He's always expecting me to work weekends and evenings. Now, already I know she's completely given her power away, because whenever anybody says to me, he expects me to do this and he wants me to do that, it's like, oh, she just forgot who's running the show. She thinks he's running the show, and actually he is, right? So I said to her, well, if you knew you could communicate honestly with this client some boundaries and have him honor them, would you? And she said, yeah, but he's never going to do that. That's not who he is. I said, okay, if you knew that you could complete your relationship with this client in a gracious way, and there wouldn't be any negative consequences, would you complete the relationship? She said, absolutely. Now there's the truth, right? The truth is I don't want to work with this person anymore. What's the other truth? I don't know how to end that relationship. So what we did, in a very practical sense, is start looking at language. It's like conflict resolution with self 101. We look at, okay, what's the truth? I don't want to work with them anymore. Most people will stay in relationships or keep saying yes because they don't have the language to say no with grace and love. So I said to her, let's work on the language. We did. We worked on the language she would use to complete this relationship. We practiced it back and forth. I played the guy, she played herself, she played the guy, I played her. We went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Got her ready. She did a lot of work around this because we also looked at the history, because I don't just look at present-day situation, because any present-day challenge is just an example of something that's been going on for a long time in other areas of your life. So letting go of this client, for example, wasn't just about letting go of the client. It was about breaking a pattern that kept her stuck in relationships where she felt like she was losing her energy all the time. Make sense? So we worked on it very diligently for several days. And then the time came where she was going to have a conversation with this client. So I did, my sister, I love it. My sister calls this sandwich support. I spoke to her before she had the conversation with the client, and I planned to speak to her afterwards, so that regardless of what happened, I would make her feel like a queen. We talked beforehand. We rehearsed the conversation one last time. I said to her, "You ready?" She said, "I'm ready. I'm nervous, but I'm ready." I said, "Well, of course you're nervous. You're supposed to be nervous when you're making big changes in your life. That's just human, right?" She picks up the phone. She goes, she calls this man, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm, just like praying everything goes okay for her. She calls me afterwards, and I said to her, "Well, how did it go?" She said, "You're not going to believe what happened." Now, I've since learned that whenever somebody says, "You're not going to believe what happened," I know that the divine has intervened. Right? I hear that all the time. Why? Because this woman finally decided to tell the truth and do something about it. She said, "I called this guy up. He gets on the phone. My knees were shaking, and I said, 'Joe, listen, I need to talk to you about something.' And Joe said, 'Listen, before you do, I just have to tell you, I'm leaving the company. And you're actually going to be working with someone else.' And I just wanted to get that out up front, because I'm going to transfer the work that we've been doing to Mary Smith, who she knew and loved." And she said, when Joe said to me, "So what did you want to talk to me about?" I said, "Oh, nothing. I just wanted to talk to you about, what we talked about the other day, and just kind of move things forward, nothing much." So when she called me, she said, "Can you believe that happened?" I said, "Yeah, I can believe that happened. This is what happens. The divine God, spirit, creator, however you define that. You know, I respect where people are on their journeys. I don't believe there's one path. There's many. That beautiful power works in partnership with you, but it's really hard to be in partnership with people when their energy is closed, stuck, shut down. So it might be, you know, that there are relationships in your life. I'm not saying there are relationships in your life you need to end. No, because actually I think one of the big reasons we're here as part of our spiritual evolution is to learn how to heal relationships, how to both come to the table and meet and work through what isn't working. But you know what? If somebody else isn't coming to the table, you got to walk away. Otherwise, your energy stays stuck. I remember one time, this is like such a great story, and I want you to know this is true. This is absolutely true. Many years later, this is before I met my husband, Michael, who I've been with now for almost 20 years. Before Michael, I was dating this man. I was in a relationship with this guy for 5 years. That's a little different than dating, don't you think? Now, up until this point, I had been doing a lot of work on myself. I'd been reading a lot of books. I'd been in therapy. I'd really, I felt like I understood how my energy was impacting the world. And I had been in this relationship, and it was one of those relationships where this would be, I think, in some ways, the completion of the relationship part of the training program on the spiritual adventure, you know? It was one of those relationships where, like, I knew deep inside that I wasn't meant to be in that relationship, and I think he knew it too, but we kept breaking up and getting back together, and breaking up and getting back together, and breaking up for the 7th time. Has anybody ever done that before? Like, you just break up and get back? Yeah, it's exhausting, right? So we had broken up. I had moved out. I had my own apartment. I had been in my own apartment for a while. And I had one of those nights. You know those nights where I was feeling really lonely. I had gone out to dinner the night before with a friend of mine, and of course, everywhere I looked were couples in love. That's just all you see, right? It's like, I don't want to see couples in love, that's all you see, couples in love. So this particular night, I was at home. This is a great example of how the universe has your back when you open this channel of energy. I'm at home, and I was going out to dinner with my dear friend at the time. And before that, I was thinking about my boyfriend, my ex-boyfriend. I'm going to call him Brad. I think of like Brad Pitt. So I was thinking about Brad. I'm thinking about him right now. No, I'm kidding. And I was doing the typical, I wonder how he's doing. You know what I'm talking about, right, woman? She's like, oh my God, here we go. I wonder how he's doing. You know, I really should give him a call and just see how he's doing. And then you start with this self-manipulation. You know, I'm really over him. I've moved on. I have my own apartment. I'm happy. You know, finally the cord's been cut. I just want to check in and see how, I mean, come on, we were together for 5 years. You know, I mean, you don't just rip people out of your life and never have anything to do with them again. That's stupid. That's young. I don't need that. I need to just really call and check in. Fortunately, the wise part of me was going, I don't think so. Don't do it. But the other part was really, really strong. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to wait till after dinner with my friend Max. If I get back and I still feel moved to call him, I'll call him then. That's a really smart thing to do, people, by the way. When some part of you is really being, wanting to impulsively act, and you got a little voice going, I don't think so, put some space between that moment and action, please. So I sat down to watch the news on TV, and as I was watching the news on TV, I saw an advertisement for a I lived in Massachusetts, and it was an advertisement for a local magazine show. And the advertisement was, tonight we're going to talk about how singles are meeting each other in Boston. So I thought, I'm single, that's interesting. I'll record. Remember the old videotape recording days? Put a videotape in the VCR, hit record, set it up, and I thought, oh, I'm going to record that show, might as well. It gave me a little sense of false empowerment. So I go out to dinner, and of course, I'm out to dinner with Max, and I'm looking around, and people are like looking into each other's eyes, and they're holding hands. Like I'm seeing the whole scene from Flashdance. Do you guys remember when she's eating lobster? And she's playing footsies with them under the table. Like I'm seeing that at every damn table I look at. I'm wanting a sweatshirt off the side of my shoulder, the whole thing. So we finish dinner, we go home, and I'm just feeling like, you know what, I really want to call him. But then I remember the videotape. And I think, you know what, I'm going to watch the dating show first. So go to the VCR, rewind it, hit play, and the show starts. And they say, so we're going to look at a variety of ways that singles are meeting other singles in the Boston area. We're going to start with personal ads. What we did is we went to Boston Magazine and we chose 2 personal ads, one from a man, one from a woman. We called both of them up. We invited them to go together on a date and asked if we could film them on their date. So I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of cool. We'll see what happens. This is way before internet dating people, when you actually had like personal ads on paper, right? I'm so glad some of you remember those days. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden they say, so first we're going to start with the man, and boom, up on the screen comes this personal ad. And then comes my ex. I'm going to just let that sink in a couple moments. Oh my God. Because I'm reliving it right now in my body. He comes up on the screen. I immediately hit stop, and I think, oh my God. Which is usually a sign, too, that the divine has intervened. When you're saying, oh my God, you're having a conversation, people. Oh my God. I think, now think about this, everybody. Put yourself in this position. I'm like, do I want to watch him on a date with someone else? You betcha. I hit play. Yeah. Oh my God, I still get chills when I think about it. So I hit play, and now I'm watching the date. They show the girl, sweet woman, really lovely, attractive woman, and I'm sitting there like just shaking watching the whole thing, and they go out on a date together, and they film them, having dinner and chatting with each other, and I'm like, And then the moment happens. They interview Brad. I almost said his name. They interview Brad, and I love you. We'll get to the part where I love you in case you ever see this. They interview him, and they say to him, so tell us, what are you looking for in a woman? And he says the magic words that release me. He says, well, I'm really looking for somebody who can bring out the best in me. And in that moment, his words pretty much encapsulated the whole state of the 5 years of our relationship. He desperately wanted me to bring out the best in him when that was his job. But I thought it was mine. And because I made a decision to wake up, I didn't know that in the beginning, but because I made a decision to wake up and to start to do the necessary healing work to see how that current relationship was just a replication of so many relationships before that, going all the way back to mom and dad, which is true for all of us, whether you believe it or not. I've yet to meet a human being that isn't recreating relationships with mom and or dad in their life. Until I was willing to face the truth, to make the commitment to evolve my level of consciousness, I wouldn't have understood that. In that moment, how many of you have ever had that experience where something happens and there is a shift and you are no longer the same person you were 1 minute before, 30 seconds before, right? In some ways, that's been my business as a coach. You know, for 20 years, I'm interested in that shift. I'm interested in what I can say to you or what I can have you do that will close a door that needs to be closed instantly so that you can open the door that needs to be opened to allow the true essence of who you are to come to the world. Now, in that moment, I knew. I blessed him. I saw him as an angel in my life, because I wouldn't have been where I was at the time. And you know, you can best believe I didn't pick up the phone and call him. Never again. I was able to bless him and move on. Now, what is the likelihood? I remember distinctly when I called my friend Max and said to her, "You are not going to believe what just happened." What's the likelihood of something like that happening? It seems miraculous, right? This is the kind of experience we are all privy to when we decide to wake up. When we decide that, you know what, I'm not going to keep pretending that I'm happy where I'm living, or that I'm fulfilled in my job, or I'm not going to pretend that I'm happy in my marriage, or that these friendships are really feeding me. I'm feeding them. I'm feeding everybody. I'm like a giant boob to the world. I said boob. That was much better than what I could have said. When we wake up, you know, when you start admitting, I don't like where I live, this clutter is killing me, I need to do something about it, or I'm lonely, I don't have soul-nurturing friendships in my life, or a relationship that feeds me. You know, when we start telling the truth and then we just speak that truth, I mean, you admit it to yourself, then you speak it out loud to yourself, then you speak it out loud to someone you trust, and you make a decision. You don't even have to worry about what you need to do. All you have to do is make a decision that you are going to act to start living more of this truth and invite the universe to support you and open some door, and life will meet you. You know, that's what manifesting is all about. That's what The Secret was all about. It's all about energy. It's about recognizing if you keep, you know, when I started out, you know, I had a passion for the early spiritual writers like Emmett Fox and Florence Scovel Shinn and Catherine Ponder. When I was in my mid-20s, I used to be at the gym on the step machine reading all those books, Think and Grow Rich. Like, I read those books like they were Bibles. I read every book Emmett Fox ever wrote. I studied them. I love him, I know. I studied them, and Robert Collier, who wrote an incredible book called Secrets of the Ages, I remember distinctly being at the gym reading that, and he talked about treasure mapping back in like the early 1900s. And I remember going home, this is what I mean about waking up and taking action, going home and creating a treasure map, getting a board and putting pictures on it of things I wanted to draw into my life. I have years of treasure maps, and if you were here with me in my living room, I could take you through and show you the incredible things that have shown up in my life. Now, some people will look at that and go, wow, you're really lucky. That's ridiculous. I take manifesting seriously. I recognize that manifesting begins with our commitment to spiritual evolution. It's not about getting a new SUV. That's a byproduct, maybe. I remember when I first began and somebody said, your thoughts create your reality. I'm like, sure. Okay. They're like, no, really, you should just like write something down and see what happens. So I went, okay, took action. Okay, I took a little yellow sticky note. I wrote 3 things. This is many years ago, I wrote the kind of computer I wanted because the boss I was working for at the time, I had a part-time job as an administrative assistant, and I loved the computer I was working on. I liked the word processor I had. Anybody remember word processors? And floppy disks? So I wrote down, because I was a writer at heart, I had the IBM Selectric typewriter. It was my best friend. You remember that too? She's like, oh, I remember that. I can tell you feel the same way about it. I wanted a computer. It was a big deal back then. So I wrote down computer. I wrote down free travel, because I thought I'm not just going to put travel, I'm going to put the word free in front of it. And I forget what the next thing was. I don't remember the third thing. But anyway, 1 month later, it was Christmas time, my boss said to me, hey, I got you a Christmas gift. Instead of a bonus, I got you a computer. He got me the exact computer I had written on the little yellow sticky note. 1 week later, I got a call from a friend of mine who was working for Pitney Bowes, and she was the top salesperson. She had made the top salesperson position at Pitney Bowes, and she said, hey, I just was awarded a trip to Boca Raton, Florida, to the Breakers Hotel, which was like a mansion to me. And she said, and I'm staying in the presidential suite, and I can take a guest. Do you want to come along? Everything's paid for. And I thought to myself, maybe this little creating your reality thing is something that works. So if you're sitting in this room and you're questioning whether or not that's true, get yourself some yellow sticky notes. Write down a few things. But you see, as you grow and mature, you realize it's not about the things on the sticky note. There's nothing wrong with that, because it showed me, it made me pay attention, right? It made me go, wait a second, this is too weird here. And for the longest time, now this is important, for the longest time, I was a goal-setting expert. I did Tony Robbins' Personal Power 30-day program 7 times. Or maybe 6 times, I don't know, but a lot. I set goals, intellectual goals, career goals, financial goals, spiritual goals, environmental goal, you name it. I mean, really, I had journals with goals written down. I had goals for my goals. And over the years, and I did the treasure maps, and a lot of that stuff did come true. Why? Because I recognized that life is about energy. The energy where you put your energy consistently is what starts to show up in your life. Whether you realize it or not, where you put your energy consistently starts to show up in your life. Then what happens is I start to get older. And I start working with people, and I, early on was sharing a lot of what I had learned about goal setting and a lot of what I had learned about manifesting in life through practical action and hard work. And then I started to get older, and as I started to get older and I started working with clients, and when Take Time for Your Life was finished, my first book, and I was working on, and Life Makeovers was sort of a deepening of that book in a simple weekly way. Stand Up for Your Life. It's interesting, writing is my spiritual practice. Has been since I'm 12 years old. And it is the single most important, most effective spiritual practice I've ever had. And my books are always about what I'm working on in my own life at the time, which kind of scares me sometimes, because when I was writing Stand Up for Your Life and I got to the chapter on courage, I thought, oh shit. I know I'm going to be faced with stuff that I'm going to have to deal with as a result of writing this chapter, and sure enough, I was. And I swear to God, my next book is going to be like about good sex, great wine, and chocolate. That's right. That's right. I'm no fool. There's a few things you learn as you grow up. I'm taking charge of this train, people. No. As time went on, and Take Time for Your Life was about getting a handle on your outer world. If your world feels chaotic, it was like what you need to do to get a handle on the outer world. Stand Up for Your Life was moving inside and saying, how do you build character and courage? How do you raise your confidence level, your self-esteem level? And then the book after that, The Unmistakable Touch of Grace, was all about the spiritual work. And this is when things really started to happen in a very different way for me. It's how it happens for everybody if you stay on the path. I wrote The Unmistakable Touch of Grace as a spiritual memoir, and part of what really inspired that book was September 11th. The experience that I had during that time. I was on a plane in Boston on my way to California that morning, and I was giving a speech in Los Angeles, I think, and I had finished doing, I had been very busy. I had done a year-long series on the Oprah show, and I had traveled a lot, and I was feeling spiritually unsettled, I guess is what I would call it. And the morning of September 11th, I was meeting my best friend, and we were going to California to give my speech, and then we were stopping at Miraval, a beautiful spa that I love to teach at, on the way back. And she was delayed in traffic. I was on the plane. She was the last person they let into the airport at Boston, and so she was in the gate outside. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law called to say to me, "Cheryl, you need to get off the plane." And I said, "Why?" And she said, there's been a terrorist attack." And I said, "Oh, no, honey, there's just a small plane that went into the World Trade Center." And I'll never forget, she said, "That's not what President Bush says." Thought, oh, maybe I should investigate this a little bit more. And sure enough, one of the planes had gone in, and the crew on my plane didn't even know that yet. It was still early. I mean, we were about to take off any minute. And so I alerted the flight attendant. She alerted the pilot. He had just received the information. And we proceeded to be in lockdown for 3 hours in Logan Airport. Eventually, they had locked my plane to try and keep people on, and eventually let us off. And I know this is going to sound crazy to all of you, but what I remember most is coming off the plane. And my best friend Max has the most incredible sense of humor. I often say I think she's from another planet. She's like a walk-in or something, because she's provides me with the greatest spiritual guidance, and at the same time, she is just a whack job in the most wonderful way. And I came off the plane, and all of us were like, "What the hell is going on?" We had no idea what was going on. And there she is sitting on the floor with her suitcase next to her, and I said to her, "What's going on?" And she says to me, "I don't know, but don't worry, we have chocolate." And she opens up her suitcase. She's one of these people, when she gets nervous, she automatically goes to humor, and it was like filled with chocolate. But that whole experience was really life-changing for me, I mean, when being that close to the whole scenario made me really start to look at what I was adding to my life versus what needed to be taken away. And this is what brings me to the important lesson here. So you go from intending and goal setting and treasure maps and all of that, which is a part of the journey, and it's important. And then eventually you start to realize, when you get really good at manifesting, that sometimes then, especially later in life, the greater spiritual work comes by what you let go of in your life, what you release. Because when you've got a good enough partnership with the divine, you really know on a deep level that the universe has your best interest at heart, often far greater than you can imagine yourself. And I'm telling you, I could tell you a billion stories that prove that to be true. And all of a sudden I started to look at, am I truly happy? Am I able to bring the essence of who I am to all of my encounters? Or am I just managing a busy life? And am I managing the needs of others, the demands of others, the invitations of others? Am I able to enjoy the things that are deeply important to me? Do I even know what they are anymore? A lot of people are pretty disconnected from what feeds them on a deep soul level, because we live in this world that is incredibly overloaded with information. We live in a culture that lives from the neck up. We fill all this up, and we forget about down here until we get sick, because the body is the last place for stress to show up. And from my experience, if you're not paying attention to what's going on in your heart and in your soul, your body's going to get your attention. First, life will try to get your attention. You'll get fired, or a relationship will end unexpectedly, or you'll lose someone you love and feel devastated by the loss. And eventually, if we don't get those messages, oftentimes the undealt with truths will lodge in the body as stress, and suddenly were dealing with some kind of illness. So I began to see that it's releasing. And this was an early part of my coach training too, so I started to do things like when my husband and I moved into the house that we live in now. It's a house that we built. Thank God I have a husband who goes along with some of the stuff I want to do. Because when we moved in, we moved everything into the garage, and we only moved into the house our bed, a sofa, a table with chairs to eat on. I moved in like a card table desk to work on, like the bare necessities. And we lived in that house for a year with the bare necessities, just to see what needed to be taken out from the garage and what didn't. It was astounding to me that 95% of what was in that garage never had to be touched. Now, if you think physical things in your life aren't affecting your spiritual world, you're out of your mind. And those of you with clutter in this room know exactly what I'm talking about, because there's two topics that never disappear in my work: clutter and finances. Those are always the two big things. That's your spiritual work. If we could see things like eliminating stuff from our lives as our spiritual work, we'd understand how important it is, and the paper you hold on to would be far less important. The stuff that you hold on to from, your relatives who passed on a generation ago would be far less important to you. What I started to discover was this: as you get older, you've got to develop trust in your partnership with the divine. Otherwise, you're just scared all the time. We're worried about losing stuff, we're worrying about losing people, we're worried about dying. If you don't develop this relationship, you just walk around scared, and scared people try to control their world, which you can't do, ever. It's a joke, it's a myth, it's an illusion. I started to look at what I needed to let go of in my life. Some of them were relationships that were one-way relationships that were draining my energy. They were with people I knew we couldn't heal the relationship. I had outgrown it, and it was time to move on. And if it sounds arrogant, so be it. Your soul's at stake. I started to eliminate stuff from my life I didn't absolutely love or need. And I'm in the process of finalizing that piece of it. I started to look at the work that I was doing, and I made a decision that I was no longer going to accept invitations that didn't feel like an absolute yes. Like I was going to start actually taking my own advice, the stuff that I wrote about. My husband makes me crazy like that. Every now and then he'll send me a text with one of my book covers. Hi, remember this? I know. My husband's a cartoonist. The other day he sent me a cartoon. It's a picture of me with a book in my hands, and it says, "Take time for your husband." I said to him, "Honey, if you think that's an invitation for a romantic night, it's not working. Do the dishes. That'll get you what you want." Right? Us ladies know, this is the great thing about perimenopause. You stop pretending everything's okay. You really do. You start telling the truth, and you just don't give a shit whether people like it or not. Yes. My poor husband. He's like, "How long is this going to last?" Said, "The rest of your life, my friend. The rest of your life." Us women know that housework is foreplay. Isn't that true? Yeah. Anyway, I digress into one of my most favorite topics. Life, capital L, has an amazing plan for you. And the key to fulfilling that plan is your commitment to your own spiritual evolution. I can pretty much guarantee you, regardless of who you are, how old you are in this room, regardless of your circumstances, if you were to spend the next year of your life removing everything from your life that doesn't bring you joy, or that you don't absolutely have to do, a pretty incredible life would unfold before you. I think of it sort of like this. There's this giant aisle right here in front of me. For the longest time, I thought, with me standing here, that I had to work hard to get there at the end. You know, there was always a goal at the end of the tunnel, right? Always an accomplishment. And I had to set the goal, I had to create the strategy, the action plan, I had to follow that action plan and put one foot in front of the other, do all the work, and that eventually with hard work I'd get there. But you know what I know now? And I'd like to just share it with you so that you don't have to work as hard. First of all, what life has planned for you at the end of this aisle is far greater than you can even dream up for yourself, because it's connected to the essence of who you are, which is what that life with a capital L is made of. And if instead, by standing here, you were to just start removing things from your life that no longer work from you, from this aisle in front of you, the life you're meant to live effortlessly starts moving toward you. Now, I really want you to get the profound nature of that statement. So many of us are trying to make stuff happen. We're trying to strive, fix, create, intend, manifest. But at this point in time on the planet, particularly, well, I was going to say in America, but I've been all over the world. You know, I've been to other places in the world, and it seems to be pretty consistent. If you leave here this weekend and you do things like eliminate the clutter that's in your life, start telling the truth about the relationships in your life. If you hate your job, you get a resume together and you find somebody to make sure, an experienced person to make sure that the resume is done right. And then you get your butt out there and you start meeting people, which is still the single most effective way to get anything done, is networking. The thing most people never do, and then they say the economy's bad. No, not in my world. Because when you take charge of your own life and you do what you got to do, the economy's great. So if you start doing these things, you start just, removing the stuff from your life, this incredible life starts unfolding before you. Has anyone had that experience? Yeah. It's the opposite of what we're taught. I think of my computer as my mind. It's a reflection of my mind. So sometimes if my inbox gets too full, I think, oh, no. I got limited space in here, and I want to be in charge of what's in there. And I'll just start deleting stuff. I just don't care that much anymore about stuff. That's not who you are. One time, early on when I had a problem with clutter, paper in particular, I had to keep everything. God forbid I need it, right? How often do you go to it? But, I remember in my apartment, I had a filing cabinet, 4-drawer, big filing cabinet filled with paper. So ridiculously full that I couldn't get anything because you had to you couldn't put anything else in, and when you tried to reach in, you couldn't move files. See, you all, some of you know what I'm talking about. And I remember the day I was so fed up trying to shove a piece of paper in the filing cabinet, I thought, I will not be a slave to this crap anymore. And I went and got 4 green garbage bags, and I literally dumped the drawers into the garbage bags without looking at anything. It's one of the things I love about myself. I'm a little radical and rebellious sometimes. I filled up 4 green garbage bags. I remember I lived in the 2nd floor apartment, and I'm like, boom, 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 boom. The garbage bags are going down the stairs outside. I put them in the trunk of my car because I knew if I put them in the rubbish buckets at my apartment, I'd probably chicken out and go into them. Put them in the trunk of my car, called a friend of mine who had a local gas station with a dumpster because I knew I wouldn't dumpster dive. I wasn't that desperate. And I said to him, can I get rid of these 4 bags? He said, absolutely. And I chucked the 4 bags into the dumpster. Now here's the important thing. I'm still here. And I created an affirmation that I use till this day. I remember everything I need to remember when I need to remember it. I remember everything I need to remember when I need to remember it. It's called trusting yourself. Everything we have in our lives, from the draining relationships to the stuff, has cords of energy going from us to it. And those cords of energy are just zapping you of your life force every day. There was only one time I needed stuff that was in that drawer, the bags I threw out. One client called me to work on a consulting project, and I had research material in those drawers. But you know what? By then, the internet was here. I say use technology to your advantage. Anything you need to find is out there. There's no excuse for paper anymore. Except, of course, your wills and, that kind of stuff. There's just no excuse for paper. We have to look at how honoring ourselves spiritually, really waking up and facing the truth, how it plays out in our daily lives. It's the same thing with finances. When I made a decision, I was 28 years old. I had $15,000 in credit card debt, which was a lot of debt at that time for a 28-year-old young woman. And I would go to a store with a credit card, knowing that, I was just getting myself into more debt. And, the question you have to ask yourself with anything you do is, how does this make you feel about yourself? Is this honoring the divine in you? And I finally realized after doing the work that I was doing, every time I used my credit card when I couldn't afford it, I was just feeling really badly about myself. What does that do energetically? When people feel bad about themselves, they draw into their lives people who will affirm that you're bad. You don't draw in great opportunities when you think you're not worth it. You draw in opportunities that are going to keep challenging you to look at that. Does that make sense? So I remember I decided, you know what? I am getting rid of this debt. It's holding me prisoner. It's holding the essence of who I am as a prisoner. And I went out, I got a second job, and I made a list. First, I made a list of all of my debt with the highest interest rate at the top. It was really quite simple. The lowest interest rate at the bottom. I made all the minimum payments, and any money, extra money that I had from an added part-time job, I put towards the highest debt. Paying bills became a pleasure. Why? Because I made it a game. I'm getting debt-free. I'm getting debt-free. I'm freeing up. I'm like cutting that cord. And every time I could pay my bills, I was excited about it because I'd watch the debt go down. So what happens? Just like I said, when life gets the message that you're willing to pay attention and that you're willing to do what it takes to really honor who you are, it rallies to support you. I paid off $10,000 of that debt, and at the time I paid off 10, I had 5 left. A dear friend of mine who was she was like 80 years old at the time, came to me and said to me, listen, she had no family at all, and she said to me, I've just been diagnosed with cancer, I've got 3 months to live, and I'm wondering if you could help me just get my life in order. And I remember thinking, no way. My first reaction was, I don't want to be close to death like that. And I don't want to, that's way too intimate for me. I was scared of death. I didn't want to actually be with someone. And she was actually quite at peace with it. I look back now and realize she was ready to go. She just wanted to get some things in order. She had a big house that was filled with a lot of stuff and a lot of affairs that needed to be handled. And so fortunately, the good codependent in me said yes, because I couldn't say no. It would turn out to be a life-changing experience for me to actually be with somebody as they go through the dying process. And then I was fortunate enough to be there with her when she actually died. I remember it was a Wednesday night. I had given a speech. I came home. It was 10 of midnight. I called the hospital where she was, and the nurse said to me, she's really not doing that well. You should come in first thing in the morning because I think that I think the time is near. And I said, okay, I'll be in. I'll get up at 6 o'clock. I'll get into the hospital. And I went to bed. And 20 minutes later, I woke up and something said, go into the hospital. And I was grown up enough to listen to that voice. And I heard that voice clearly. I knew it was a clear message. And I got dressed, and I drove an hour to the hospital. And I got there just at time. This is the other thing about spiritual adventure, seeing life as a spiritual adventure. When you see it that way, when you really recognize that everyone you encounter is a spiritual change agent in some way. I'll never forget the nurse who was on duty that night. She was a young woman. I got there and she said to me, I've moved her into a private room. I think she's dying. And I want you to have privacy with her. And she said to me, I've never been with a dying patient before. I said, well, that makes two of us. So don't worry, we'll figure this out. And I went into the room. Lucy was her name. She was laying in bed. And the nurse said to me, she's unconscious, but she can hear you. Hearing is the last thing to go when a human body passes, so talk to her. And so I just started talking to her. Like a good student, as soon as I knew she was dying, I read everything Elizabeth Kubler-Ross ever wrote. I studied grief and death and dying, like anything I could get my hands on, I studied, because I really believed that being well-informed up here would protect my heart. It was helpful, but it doesn't protect you from the realities of life. And I remember sitting there, and I remembered reading in one of Elizabeth's books that often when the soul of a person is ready to move on, they can be pulled back by the people here who don't want them to go. So I sat by her bed, and she was breathing heavily, and I just sat there, and I started to just go through all of the plans we had talked about. Don't worry, I'm going to give your needlepoint chair to Mrs. Swan. I'm going to give your opal ring to your cousin. Like all of these different. I went through all of the things as I was sitting there, and she was laying there, and then all of a sudden, she opened her eyes and lifted her head and looked at me, and this big smile came on her face. And then she took her last breath, and that was it. So, of course, I was like, oh my God, I'm with a person who's gone. Then I remembered what Elizabeth said, and I started to cry. But as I was crying, it's funny the things you do in those moments, right? As I was crying, I was looking up going, keep going, it's okay, just keep going. I'm just upset, but I want you to go, please just go. And brings me right back there. It's such a blessing to be with someone when they end their life. I mean, I just highly recommend it, if you can. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but those of you who have done it know what I'm talking about. It really changed things. You're so sweet. Thank you.
They're clean.
They're clean? Oh, good. Even if they weren't clean, I'd use them. Thank you. When Lucy died, she left me as co-executive of her estate with her lawyer. And she left us a small lump sum of money. Guess how much she left me? $5,000. Mm-hmm. And I knew when I was told by the attorney, not only that, but it was at a time in my life where the attorneys came to me and said, listen, she's got this big home. Would you be willing to live in the house, all expenses paid, for the next year while we dismantle the house? It'll keep the house safe. And it was just at a time where I needed a place to live. And it was at the time that I was just trying to launch my speaking career. And I know she's an angel. She's been up there ever since, supporting me without a doubt. And she gave me a great story to tell and the most extraordinary experience, because up until that point, I was so afraid of death. In our country, it used to be, not that long ago, people died in their homes with family around them. And now we've just done this crazy thing where we make everybody, we're attached to the medical system that puts you in a hospital in a horrible scenario, in my humble opinion, and a horrible space. And anyway, I can't help. Also, I just stand up. Well, I can't even just go there. But I think of my friend Debbie Ford and how prepared I was for her death because of what Lucy invited me into experience. But the point is this. This really is a magical, magical world we live in. And the key that unlocks the door to your kingdom is your willingness to recognize that as a spiritual being, you are far You are part of a far greater universe than you realize. And we keep getting bogged down by the stuff of life. And then we get bogged down with the obsession about accomplishing and acquiring and manifesting. But you know, at this point, your soul came here to experience. It didn't come here to accomplish. There's a big difference. We're here to experience our ability to create, our ability to use our energy as the divine beings we are, to use our energy to manifest a more beautiful world. And you know what? We need that message now more than ever, because the patriarchal system that has brought us to this point is slowly and systematically disintegrating, thank God. There is such a call for the feminine, which it's not about men or women, it's about compassion and empathy for the self first and foremost, because you cannot be truly compassionate for others until you learn how to have the kind of empathy you need for yourself. You know, we need to wake up and remember who we are and the enormous potential that we have to create and to bring a more egalitarian, balanced world to reality. Right now, you know, it's probably going to not be pretty for a while. I don't want to affirm anything bad, but you know, there's a lot that's making me crazy these days. But we can't lose sight of who we are. We can't lose sight that there is a world far beyond what we see physically. Each one of us gets to do our part, because, you know, then you get to experience the joy. You know, I write a blog every week, and I was home all summer for the first time in a long time. I took the summer off, and for the first month that I was off, I'd wake up every morning, make myself a good cup of English tea, go into the living room, turn on the TV, and watch mindless television for like an hour or two. My God, people, I was watching Millionaire Matchmaker. I was watching, definitely Shark Tank, my favorite show. I was like rewatching shows of Shark Tank. I was watching, The Good Wife, which I love. Debbie Ford made me start watching that. She got me hooked. Scandal, another good one. Downton Abbey, which I hadn't seen any. And I started to get worried about myself about 30 days into it. I mean, I did. I was saying to my husband, I'm like, Michael, I love my husband because he so talks me off of cliffs so easily. I said to him, honey, I'm really worried about myself. He said, why? I said, I'm watching television every morning when I'm not doing anything. I don't want to answer email. I don't want to talk on the phone. I don't want anybody to come to the house. I just want to watch television. He goes, well, you probably need it. I'm like, who needs television? Like, I don't get that. He goes, clearly you do. And, oh, and I was also watching, because I had never seen any of West Wing, so I went back to the first season, because I love the fact that you can consume this stuff on your laptop, one right after the other. That totally works for me, and that's where we're headed, media-wise. So I'm like watching all the West Wings, because the writing is brilliant. And then The Newsroom, of course, on HBO, which is also Aaron Sorkin now. Yes! Listen to me up here advertising television shows. But you know, I realized, one morning I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to watch the damn television shows for as long as I want to. I'm going to watch them for 3 hours if I want to. I'm going to take breaks in the afternoon and go back and watch them if I want to. Because the other thing that's great about getting older is you start to trust your impulses. You trust that they're leading you somewhere. And about a month and a half into it, I woke up one morning and I thought, I just don't feel like watching television anymore. By giving myself permission, it's kind of like if you give yourself permission to eat donuts, you eventually get sick of it. I think. I'm not sure, so I don't know if you should try that. But I'm thinking maybe. And over the summer, I mean, what I realized was I was just decompressing. I was just finally like letting go. And over the summer, I created a garden on my deck, which I love. And I would sit in the back deck and I would just stare at the backyard and I would just look at the trees. And I would look at the flowers that were blooming on the deck and I would like stand over my kale and tell it how much I loved it. And one day I was sitting on the deck with my husband. It was like close to sunset, and we were just sitting next to each other, staring out over the backyard, and this hummingbird came flying to one of the hibiscus flowers. Now, I've never seen lots of hummingbirds where I live, so to me it was like a magical moment. So this hummingbird came to this beautiful orange hibiscus flower, was doing its thing, and I'm just marveling at it. I'm amazed. And all of a sudden, the hummingbird leaves the flower, which is like way over on the opposite side of the deck, comes over to my husband and I and hovers right in front of us. Like literally hovers for 10 seconds. And instantly, like tears sprang to my eyes. And I said, and both of us just went, as we're watching it, and then it took off. And I looked at him and I said, you know, what if that's really what it's all about? Because in that moment, what I realized is that that moment, the joy I felt in my being, was as good, if not greater, than the joy I had felt at some of the most important highlights of my life. And that was a pretty simple situation. And I think as we get older, we realize that, you know, there's a world beyond where we are. When you connect with the spiritual nature of your life, the spiritual nature of the universe, there's a whole bunch of stuff that becomes less important. And I think that's what I really want to invite you to do. You know, I'm going to wrap up with a story that, to me, is a beautiful example of how we are spiritual beings in a human body, and how our consciousness exists far beyond the limitations of this life. You have to be awake and aware and willing to believe in order to begin to get the evidence that that's true. And then there are times where you get unmistakable evidence, and you have those moments where something magical, a coincidence occurs, and you think, my God, how did that just happen? And then the mind kicks in to like start to try and, rationalize how it happened. We all do that, right? But the more you wake up to your life as a spiritual adventure, the less you question those moments, and the more you realize that this really is a magical banquet set out for us to partake in. And the more we connect with the essence of who we are, the more that whole banquet gets upgraded. And then, interestingly enough, the less you need at all in life. So earlier this year, my husband Michael, my friend Lucy died before I knew my husband Michael. I met Michael afterwards. When Debbie Ford passed away at the beginning of this year, as life would have it, I was teaching a retreat at Miraval. Debbie and I had said our goodbyes, and we were communicating via text, interestingly enough, as she was sort of passing on. And at the time that I was teaching at Miraval, we had a snowstorm again in the east, and I got stuck at Miraval, which isn't such a bad place to get stuck. But Debbie was in San Diego dying, and a friend of mine at the retreat was actually driving through the mountains to San Diego home. And I decided, because I couldn't get out on a plane, to get in the car and drive with her to see Debbie. And I'm really glad I did, because I got to spend 2 days with her just before she passed a few days later. By that point, I knew what it was like to be with someone when they were dying, and when I came home from that experience, that very beautiful, challenging, difficult experience, I came home to discover that a niece of my husband's that we had been close to, he had been particularly close to her. She was 23, I think, 23 years old, was dying of leukemia. She had had stem cell transplants. It didn't work, and she was dying. And my husband was really struggling with his own first experience of losing someone close. I knew that his soul had called in this experience for a reason. I believe we call in, especially when we witness the death of someone we love in a very conscious and open way. That's a soul's calling. It will change you. Like, I know, when people tell me that, I know that that soul planned that experience. And it says something about where you are in your growth, I think, to be able to go through that. So I knew that he was going to now go through this, that he had called this into his life. So we went into the hospital to see her. He was very close to this niece. This niece believed very strongly in an afterlife, as does my husband. And when she was making the decision to no longer fight, she requested that he come in to be with her, to help her make the decision. And he spent 8 hours with her in her hospital room, talking to her about the afterlife, talking to her about Anita Morjani's work. Anita's work is so beautiful. I have a dear friend of mine, Bob Olson, who has a website called Afterlife TV, and he was showing her interviews of people who had had near-death experiences, people who had been communicated with by people who had passed on, all of this sort of stuff, and she made a decision that, you know what, I don't want to fight anymore. My husband and I went into the hospital a week later to say our goodbyes to her. And it was one of those rare experiences that I wish more of us could have, where when someone knows they're dying, they're able to say that and to have an honest conversation. I stood in the back of the room as I watched my husband laying next to her, saying to her, "You will be the sentinel at the gate when I get there." And I think it's going to be forever, but for you it will be the flash of an eye. We'll be reunited again. It was just beautiful. We said our goodbyes, and she passed away 3 days later. And the other thing we did that I highly recommend is we talked about how we'd communicate with each other once we were gone. Debbie and I did that as well. So Marina, which is her name, said to my husband Michael, Michael said, "How will I know it's you? How will I know if you communicate with me?" And she said to him, "Balloon ball." He said, "Balloon ball?" She said, "Yeah, don't you remember that skit you showed me? It was some skit on YouTube. I don't know it, I'm sure there's people, some guy, a skit where this guy gets pounded into the ground. It's like a cartoony kind of skit. My husband had showed it to Marina, and they laughed like hell about it. And he had to say balloon ball when it hurt. I know someone in this room will know what I'm talking about because it sounds pretty weird to me. But the bottom line was, it was this funny skit. It's from a long time ago. And the key to stop the pain was balloon ball. So she said, "Balloon ball." She said, "Because I know you. If I don't give you something weird like balloon ball, if I give you like flower or butterfly, you're going to completely blow it off. But when you see balloon ball, you'll know I'm on the other side watching you." And he said, "Okay, fine." 3 days later, Marina passes. And my husband's very upset. We both are, but he's really devastated. He still is. I understand. She was an amazing spirit with this big, beautiful life ahead of her. And, it's really hard for us left behind when you see, angels that are taken young or that leave young. So about a week after Marina passes, Michael's in bed one night with a laptop on his lap, and I'm walking into the bathroom when he says to me, "That's weird." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm on Facebook, and a chat box just popped up from Marina, and it says, 'Are you awake?'" So he looks at me and he says, "Do you think that's a sign?" Yes, honey, in case you ever see this, I am rolling my eyes. I said to him, "Yep, I think it's a sign." He goes, "Well, that's weird. How did that happen?" And it turns out it was a chat box from February that just popped up out of nowhere. Now, I don't use that stuff on Facebook. I only have a professional page, so I wasn't quite sure how it worked, but it just literally popped up out of nowhere and it said, "Are you awake?" So I said to him, "I think it's a sign." The next morning, I'm in my office, and my office has a giant window that looks out over our backyard. And I'm sitting in my office, and I look out, there's a line of trees on the left-hand side of the backyard, and I look out and I see at the top, and these are big, these are like 50-foot trees, I don't know, I can't gauge, but very tall trees. For all I know, like people are going, 50-foot trees, there are no such thing. Anyway, big trees, people. At the top of one of the trees, at the end of the line on the left, is a giant pink balloon, snagged on a branch, and it's just flowing like this. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay, yeah, of course I say, I get you, Marina, you know him, he needs to be hit over the head. And I run upstairs, my husband was still in bed. I run upstairs, I said, "Honey, I think Marina's given you another sign." And he goes, what? I wake up, come to the window. And he comes to the window and he's like, what? I go, "Look." And he looks and he sees the balloon and he says to me, "Oh my God, do you think that's a sign?" My husband can be a piece of work sometimes. He's a very cerebral kind of man. But I also know, remember, I know this is part of an awakening that's been designed for him. So I say to him, "Yeah, I think that's a sign." And like a few days later, I was out running, there's a reservoir behind our house, and I was out running around the reservoir, and I called him when I got to the part of the yard where the balloon was, and I said, "Hey, honey, I'm looking up at the balloon," and he's like, "Could you look around on the ground and see if there's like a ball, like a baseball or something like that?" And I said, "Yes, I'm happy to." And I'm like, really me, I'm like searching through the grass, "Please, Marina, give me a ball. Just give me a damn ball, anything." And I couldn't find anything. And I said to him, "I'm really sorry, there was no ball there." "Oh, well," he said. So 2 days later, I'm out walking around the reservoir. And it's a pretty windy day, and the reservoir is like a giant oval, and the street kind of comes down like this and meanders around the water. And I usually walk it almost every day or run it, and so I'm walking along, and this was in the spring, and I had been seeing for the first time in a long time white swans in the reservoir, beautiful swans. And I love them. I mean, I love anything in nature, and I would just be so excited. I'd run and take pictures of them. And so as I'm walking along the reservoir, I see way out in the center of the reservoir, I see something white, and I think, oh my gosh, I wonder if it's a swan. And as I continue to walk, I see this thing in the water, like out of the water, but clearly some part of it is in, and it's flying. It's like moving effortlessly along the water like this toward me. So I'm thinking, wow, look at that swan glide. I mean, that's pretty, it was like really gliding. So I continue to walk, and I come up around the reservoir, and I see as it gets closer, and I realize it's not a swan, but what? I have no idea what it is. It's bizarre. It's got like red and white, and I just can't quite figure out what it is. So I reach a point, and this is literally what happens. I reach a point in the reservoir where there's trees all around the reservoir where it opens up. And as I look up, I see this thing come floating toward me. The wind picks it up. It comes off the rocks on the shoreline, up over a guardrail into my arms. And Brian, if we could just show the picture, this is what I find. Somewhere. It's a balloon with a ball in it. I knew, like, it came into my arms, and I looked at it like, what the hell is this? And then I went, Marina, if this doesn't do it, you can stop. And I took that balloon. The only part of the balloon, this, like the little part that, where you tie the knot, was the only thing in the water, and it was just being carried right to where I was. I had that balloon, and I went on the rest of my walk holding that balloon, just talking to her and really knowing that this kind of stuff doesn't happen just for an individual purpose either. Like, I knew the interesting thing was I was scheduled to give a speech the following weekend in Atlanta, Georgia, where Marina was from. And her grandmother and her aunt were scheduled to attend. And I knew that she sent the balloon ball for both Michael and for her family, because I knew I needed to bring the story. And then, interestingly enough, in my book signing line in Atlanta, there were several people who came up to me who said they needed to hear that story, and I knew she had a greater purpose. So I take this balloon, of course, and I go running home. I finish my walk, because I think I just want to be settled. I finish my walk, and I go home, and I come upstairs, and I say to my husband, "Hey, honey, and I've got the balloon ball behind my back. I said, "Hey, honey, I think Marina sent you another sign." And he's like, "Really? What is it this time?" And I hold it out, and I watch his face. And he goes, "Is that a ball inside the balloon?" I said, "Yes." "Oh my God, that's a sign from Marina, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, it is. Yes, it is." And he had this little tiny urn with some of her ashes on a mantle in our bedroom over the fireplace, and he took the balloon and attached it to the top of the urn. And it's there. It's like completely out of air now. It's like this flopped over balloon ball thing. These are the kinds of things that happen to every one of us. It's available to every one of us when we open the channel. And the way we open the channel is by remembering who we are. And as you remember who you are, this beautiful spiritual being in a human body on planet Earth, Louise would yell at me if she heard me say don't. Please remember. She says, don't say don't forget. Please remember. Please remember not to get caught up in the stuff of our physical lives. It's not why you're here. You're here to become more awake and alive and conscious. You're here to recognize when experiences like that occur, because they happen every day all around you. It's just most of us are too busy to even see it. Your life is a spiritual adventure. And it will become quite magical when you decide to wake up to that reality. I really appreciate that all of you hung in there with me this morning. I appreciate that you sent loving energy to Wayne. I wish I could take you all home with me, but my house wouldn't fit all of you. So we could just have like a conversation. We can have the conversation. You can always visit me on Facebook. I'm always in touch with people there. But I just want to thank you very much, and I really hope that when you leave here, when you leave the conference, you begin to just really remember who you are. Please do. Thank you, everybody, very, very much.